a lot of that had to do with just finishing the book and doing my book tour this year. But there's nothing like, and I know that you appreciate this too, being in front of students or colleagues who are trying to figure out the things that you and I have spent years at this point delving into. And that's why inviting you on to have this conversation about exchange traded funds, I think is going to be so great, because I know you and I are both into that empowerment that leads to transformation. Am I right?
Well, not only are you right, I mean, just as a personal note, I'd like to say that one of the things that I admire about Rachel is that she speaks candidly that we should all be millionaires. And she
Yes.
is a fellow legacy intellectual property attorney like each of us.
Yes.
And she understands that connect between imagining what you might not have seen and building on those blocks to make it a reality. And I would continue that to compliment you. I mean, I was very fortunate to have an advanced opportunity to look at Digital Money Demystified. And I remember reading through it and thinking, this is the simplified, accessible version of this whole universe that can feel a little
Mm,
bit cryptic to a lot of people, to
yeah.
understand how you bring your talents and where you are today to this space that is full of opportunity. But the first thing to make that happen is you need trusted voices, and you need to
Yes.
see an inclusive group of people and a community where you can imagine bringing your talents and leveraging those talents to be paid fairly for the value that you bring. So thank you for
Mm,
stepping out into the forefront when there weren't many faces that looked like ours, learning this space, becoming a leader in this space. And then, as I've seen you do time and time again, reaching back to pull
yeah.
others along through the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and say, you
Oh, the
belong
FUD.
here. So I
Yes.
really appreciate the example that you created for us, Tonya.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, without further ado, let's jump in here. I love these LinkedIn lives as well to kind of to connect with people while we're having our conversation. I will have one eye on the chat there, but my focus is really on how we can help people figure out the promise and the power, the pitfalls, and kind of the opportunities. Because and before I introduce you formally, the questions that I've received, and I'll be interested to hear if you've received some as well, certainly through your LinkedIn posts and other information that you've shared. I suspect you've received a lot of the same questions. We spend a lot of time, unpacking and demystifying what Bitcoin and other cryptographically secured assets are, blockchain, the metaverse, um, NFTs and all of those things. But now we have an additional question to answer. What is an ETF? And I realized that so many of my conversations just completely blew by a reasonable explanation for most people who don't speak about ETFs on a regular basis. And what I've had to learn as well is just this is yet another opportunity. This is not the dream of Satoshi by any stretch, but when we're talking about mass adoption and exposure and opportunity, that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you to let's just assume that people don't know much about crypto and don't know much about ETFs and kind of break that apart if that works for you.
That definitely
Awesome.
works.
All right, now let me get back to my script and formally introduce you. Now that we've had our little tea time, we've had our moment to connect. All right, I'm gonna count myself in, and this is the cue to my producer after the fact, and this is where the audio portion will pick up. Three, two. Hey everybody, welcome to Tech Intersect, where we navigate the crossroads of technology, business, and law in the new digital economy. And today I'm thrilled to have a friend of the show and also my dear friend and legal eagle, JoAnn Holmes, come back to the show. She is a leading Web3 law and strategy specialist, an intellectual property specialist as well. And she's back on Tech Intersect today, not only usually we're talking about NFTs or DAOs, the metaverse. Oh my. And now we have a part of the conversation that deals with investments around exchange traded funds. I thought this was an important conversation to have because recently, and we'll get into it when we get into the meat of our conversation, recently the SEC, begrudgingly, not my words, not Joe's words, but eventually, apparently, finally approved the first 10 spot Bitcoin ETFs. I want to unpack that, start to define some terms, and make this a more accessible conversation beyond Wall Street and the technoverse. And I could think of no better person to have this conversation with than Joe. So we will talk about all of that and more in a moment. But first, JoAnn Holmes, welcome.
Thank you, my friend. It is an honor and a privilege to be with you, as it is every time.
Awesome. All right. So let's kind of set the stage here. Bitcoin, folks, as hopefully many of you know by now, is a type of digital asset that can be used both as a current currency but also a store of value. It's actually taxed as a capital asset, so it has these unique characteristics above and beyond currency. And I think sometimes people get thrown off by the misnomer a bit of cryptocurrency, given that it's programmable and has so many other attributes. And we'll also be talking about exchange traded funds, or ETFs, which is a type of investment fund that tracks the price of an underlying asset or an index, for example, and these ETFs are traded on the stock exchange. Combining these two, which is what has recently happened, this Bitcoin exchange traded fund now allows investors to have exposure to Bitcoin because the ETF closely tracks the price of Bitcoin without the complexities of self-custody and owning directly. That's the kind of the best way that I can summarize this. And so, Joe, before we kind of delve into Bitcoin ETF, maybe just to get your thoughts on where we are now. We will take a step back, but let's start where we are now and take a moment to just understand and appreciate what has just happened with the approval of the first Bitcoin ETFs.
Well, thank you. That was a great overview of what's new in regard to the opportunity for ETFs. And I think we should be mindful, because Web3 and digital assets are global first, to say that it's new here in the United States. In many
Thank
other
you.
countries around the world, the opportunity to be able to buy and sell ETFs for spot Bitcoin have existed for some time. Our regulators here in the United States have had a little bit of trepidation, although futures-based Bitcoin exchange-traded funds were available before. So this is a move forward that has been, if I'm remembering correctly, about 10 years in the making, of multiple applications being filed with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission requesting the spot Bitcoin ETF. While the audience is very familiar with your disclaimers, none of this is legal or financial advice. But what this creates for those in the United States is a new, unique opportunity to be able to participate in the valuation of Bitcoin, and have that more closely tied to the actual live trading value. So one of the points of distinction, and one of the things that I think people will need to consider, is if you want to have and we're going to stick to Bitcoin because, of course, there are over 10,000 cryptocurrencies and other types of digital assets that one could hold in a portfolio, a wealth portfolio. Specifically with respect to Bitcoin, this transition to having the opportunity for spot versus futures allows not only for the trading more closely aligned to the current price of Bitcoin, but there's been a fee war. And so BlackRock and ARK and Bitwise and so many others have actually been in a race to be more competitive and offer the opportunity to those ETF customers to have a very low fee cost structure for owning these assets. So one of the things, in addition to, do I want the security of holding my Bitcoin within cold storage in a wallet that you individually control, is what are the costs that you're going to incur from buying that asset on an exchange, for example? And how does that compare to the cost of having that asset in an ETF format? So there are a number of different questions around what is your ideology related to Bitcoin? What is your financial strategy? And even then, in what type of account? So do you want to hold it in a, for example, taxable brokerage account? Or do
Right.
your non-taxable accounts like IRAs, 401ks, or otherwise have the capacity to be able to hold Bitcoin? So you would definitely want to think about some of the tax issues as well. But we're frankly catching up with so many other parts of the world and making Bitcoin ownership accessible in a different way.
I'm so glad that you started out that way because we can be so in the weeds here on our own little island in the United States, and this is not operating in a vacuum. In fact, I remember a comment perhaps a week or so ago on my LinkedIn feed that I was talking about ETFs and like, why are we talking about it in the context of America? We should be talking about it more globally. Isn't this a global economy and a global currency? And I had to say, bullseye. Spot on. When I think about Canada and other countries that seem to move forward without issue, and what seems to be kind of the dragging of the proverbial feet here in the United States. In fact, last year in March, I testified before the House Financial Services Committee talking about some of my concerns about our government's approach to kind of regulation by enforcement and the concerns with not only the uncertainty and lack of clarity, particularly for institutional investors, but the fact that this technology waits for no agency, right? And this continues to march on for sure. You mentioned, started to mention and kind of the list of exchange traded funds. I will say, in the spirit of full disclosure, that I am on the board of Digital Currency Group, which owns the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, or GBTC, known for its dominant position in cryptocurrency investments, has a spot ETF and basically converted the trust shares into the ETF shares as well, has a fee structure. But there are 11 different companies here involved now. And so wonder your thoughts about maybe even just competition as well, kind of at a high level, because as you said, this is not legal or financial advice. It was interesting for me to look through the list. I have the list here as well, and the range of fees. I didn't fully anticipate that there would be such a range of the fees and opportunities. I don't even know how people kind of make sense of it. Maybe they focus on the brand and reputational value of the fund manager. Maybe if they're in the hunt for fees, I can't really tell. Any thoughts on that?
So I think an important opportunity that has unlocked is the ability for RIAs, or registered investment advisors, to be able to both offer and frankly be able to take a commission structure from
Mm,
advising their clients around bringing these products into a portfolio. So
mm-hmm.
the reality is that you and I are speaking in a way and in a language in a community to which we're very accustomed. Many of
Right.
those in the larger financial services or the traditional Wall Street perspective are still getting up to speed that these ETFs are even available. And quite frankly, they might be frightened at what's happened to the price of Bitcoin since the ETFs were made
Sure.
available earlier this month. So when we're talking about what kinds of considerations there might be, or the competition, here in the United States, we're generally fans of competition when it serves a
Mm,
consumer and creates an efficient market for financial products. And so as I think about that, certainly some who are either directly themselves following this or who are speaking to their advisors are going to consider. I mean, one of the things that's attractive about an ETF versus a mutual fund is that ETFs traditionally have a lower cost structure. They can be traded when markets are open at whatever the given price is. You can set a limit order. Whereas mutual funds are more of a sort of stagnant type one price a
mm,
day offering. So if you are sensitive to fees and the ability to trade in or out of a product or buy it at a particular price,
Mm,
then the ETF is going to be more attractive. One step beyond that, again, is looking at what are the fee structures. So some have established a fee structure that is not going to change. Others have said for the first $1 or $5 billion, we're going to have a lower fee structure, and then we're going to move to our longer term fee structure. Many of them are offering their products, at least initially, at a zero fee rate.
mm-hmm.
And so that is certainly something that some are going to consider. Then others, we're trademark lawyers, others are just going to look at the brand and they're going to say, you know what? I already own some of BlackRock's iShares.
Right,
I already, own some of Kathy Wood's ARK ETFs.
right.
I know Bitwise is in the Web3 community, and that I trust them for this. Others are going to say, you know what? I've had Fidelity my entire life. I know and
Mm,
trust Fidelity. Others are going to look at GBTC and say this has been around for longer, and so it
right.
feels more established. Within the financial community, I've also heard conversation about keeping tight bid-ask spreads, and so and
Mm,
then also the reality of being able to do some of the behind-the-scenes things that make for efficient settlement. Um,
yeah,
Chair Gensler and the SEC made a decision that these are going to settle not in kind, and so there's an exchange of money versus actual
right.
Bitcoin that's happening on the back end. So there are a number of different issues that are going into the fine points of distinction that are being made by the different ETF offers. But if we were
Mm-hmm.
speaking to someone who does not focus their time in this space, I would say look at the fee structures, talk to your financial advisor, and probably lean a little bit more into how does this fit into your larger asset and portfolio allocation, as opposed to getting into the weeds, because most of the products are going to have competitive pricing.
Yeah, that's really important. And I'm glad that you also mentioned, how do I say, I guess the cash based model for the creation and the redemption of shares, right? And so that's why I started with the caveat that this is not Satoshi's wildest dream but I think that there are so many people for a number of reasons, either when you talk about kind of like what their assessment or tolerance might be, their desire in a de-risked capacity to have some exposure to this emerging asset class while they're still trying to figure it out. They don't want to miss out. So there's certainly some FOMO around it, but also an appreciation that Bitcoin's been around since January 3rd, 2009, but who's counting and is still here? You have this historical data that is better than many other things. And some of the other interesting points when I think about exchange traded funds for commodities like gold or silver, and at least initially, let's see how it shakes out in the next 3 to 6 months and year. It's kind of frothy right now, but the idea that the Bitcoin ETF is outperforming early indicators from silver, for example. It's second only to gold. And so this is the area where money managers, financial advisors, CPAs, lawyers, we don't have the luxury of playing the head in the sand game and going off of headlines and FUD, which stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt in our little bubble. And that's not just regular fear, regular uncertainty, and regular doubt, but oftentimes injected into the ecosystem to scare enough people away. We just don't have that option now. Clients, students, assigning partners, right? They all have questions about this, and it takes um, you have to stay ahead of the curve in terms of your education as you start to prepare to pivot and really kind of future proof your practice. Can you talk, before I ask my next question about ETFs, just your thoughts about how you started to pivot in practice? We both have done extraordinary work to take our existing expertise, but to remain relevant and then ahead of the curve when we think about moving into this new space. Can you give some pointers for, the lawyers out there in the world and other professionals who are like, I don't know what this is, but evidently now I have to pay attention?
I appreciate you offering me the chance to speak to that because we're still early. That's
Yeah,
that's the actual reality of things, that we're still early. This is still emerging technology, even though we're 15 years in. And so one of the things that's exciting to me about that is that those who are willing to learn the terminology, and by the way, you can do it for free. This is obviously a
right.
great podcast where you can learn the fundamentals and the applications of blockchain technology. There are lots of great reputable YouTube channels where you can get quality information. And so it's not necessary to formally go back to school, although Professor Evans teaches a great class and offers
You do not have to go
outstanding
to law school.
educational
Right.
material. You don't have to go to law school. You can take your experience in marketing or experience
Mm-hmm.
design or coding or tax or finance, and you can learn the sort of language and
Mm-hmm.
value of this technology and bring your talents to it. Because we are still early, no one or very few people are so credentialed that they're just light years ahead of everyone else. And
Right.
so it is really a unique opportunity where we have something like an equal playing field. And that hasn't happened very often in my career, where it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
really matter where you're from, it matters what you know. And you can show up and provide value in these communities. Typically, the conversations are happening on crypto Twitter. You know, that's what Twitter is, what its mama named it. And so I'm going to call it Twitter and not
Same.
X.
It's very much same.
But you can show up there or in Discord or Telegram or on LinkedIn and bring your insights to this space. And so I would really encourage people to please not feel intimidated. If you find someone who's sharing something of value in the spaces where you're watching in social media, reach out to them and say, hey, I admire what you shared or what you posted. I do this thing and I'd like to find a way. I've found that these communities are really hungry for people who know what they're talking about and are willing to lend a voice.
I 100% agree, and I've had an extremely positive experience in that regard, and I know that you have too. And it's really been a joy because we are literally building the plane while we're flying it. So the idea of, I just feel a sense of renewed energy. I know it takes all of my time, all day, every day, and twice on Sunday, but it's very, very exciting, and a little goes a long way with this experience. We're not at all suggesting just go out there and wing it, because you will be flagged as a fraud sooner than you can say Satoshi, I assure you. But if you come in with respect, intellectual curiosity, and being open to learn, you will quickly, you have the ability, and you have so many more resources than Joe and I did as we started, and which were even better than those who started before us. That you are in a time where you can leverage, the worldwide, internet of information, and use that knowledge to kind of be the smartest kid in class, now that we're talking about the internet of value. No longer just exchanging messages and creation, although that's critically important, but now consider that messaging, those packets of information, now contain extraordinary value that can unlock markets, that can tap new resources as a matter of liquidity. And also, and Joe and I talk about this a lot, when it comes to market participation and inclusion, that it doesn't matter where you are, who you are, what skin color you are, either your wallet has what it has or it doesn't. And in the same respect, you can avail yourselves of some of these other assets. The impediment at this point, Joe, I'm interested in your thoughts on this, is just education about how to even access, an exchange traded fund. What we've come to understand is that this is as quote unquote easy. I'm not using that in terms of easy, but easier now if you have an online brokerage account. You mentioned earlier is going to be some type of brokerage account or some tax-free setup for retirement, etc. There's so many different options, but so now this major impediment becomes a level of education and resources and access, so that you're talking to the right financial advisor to make the right decisions. So thoughts about inclusion.
going to be frank with you. A big part of my reason for, frankly, risking my career reputation in a space where there's quite a bit of hostility is because
Right.
inclusion matters to me so much. We've both been in technology and emerging technology for quite some time now. And what I have personally seen is that technology is going to impact all of us, but not all of us are at the table when it's being designed
Mm,
or when it's being implemented. And not all of us have information about that access piece. So if we talk about where we've come from to where we're going, one of the reasons why people have not held digital assets or specifically cryptocurrencies to date is because they might not have even understood what the on ramps looked like. Even if you go
right.
through a brokerage, or not a brokerage, but an exchange, excuse me,
Mm,
like a Coinbase or a Kraken, you might have been hearing that, oh, the Securities and Exchange Commission has sued them. By
right.
the way, I'm on a particular side that I'm rooting for in those lawsuits.
Well done.
And
Well
it
done.
ain't the SEC.
I know that's what,
um,
well done.
but you might think, well, wait, I have a relationship with Fidelity or Schwab. I don't know anything about Coinbase. And
Right.
so you might not have had a familiarity with, can I trust this organization to even go set up an account with them? Even if I set up an account with them, do I need to be nervous that someone's going to hack it or that something untoward is going to happen? I'm going to lose access to those assets. So there is a group
Yeah.
for whom going through that process, and either, this might sound blasphemous to some in the community, holding your crypto on an exchange, if you're nervous about taking the extra step and putting those cryptocurrency into cold wallets, which simply means having a hardware device that you exchange
Mm-hmm.
software and you've got some information that you need to store so that you can access those digital assets or cryptocurrencies. So that's what we're talking
Mm-hmm.
about. If you want to go the traditional route, you can have on exchange with a place like Coinbase or Kraken, or you can take those assets and hold them yourself on a physical wallet like a ledger, for example. That's the OG version of this.
Right.
What has become available to Americans as of January 2024 is that you can, if you have a relationship, and again, you would want to check into this because, for example, Vanguard has taken a position that they are not now, and as they say, not ever, in their current
We'll see.
perspective. Yes,
Right.
in their current perspective, they're not going to offer any of these ETFs because they have a philosophical difference. That
Mm.
is, frankly, a somewhat paternalistic perspective to take around
Mm-hmm.
what assets someone should or should not be able to invest in. So first you would want to look at, what are my on ramps? Do I have a brokerage account at a Schwab, a Fidelity, or some other organization where you can already buy stocks, mutual funds, and other types of ETFs? By the way, if you're still trying to grapple with what is an ETF, think of the SPY, which is a S&P 500 ETF, or the QQQ,
Mm-hmm.
which is the NASDAQ ETF. So these are just bundles of typically companies that they put together so you can buy a share, if you will, but have rights in lots of different companies. What we have
Mm-hmm.
now here in the United States is the ability to buy Bitcoin in the financial wrapper of an ETF. And so you can do that if you have a brokerage house that will allow it in the same type of brokerage account that you have now. However,
Mm-hmm.
one thing you would probably want to think about is the tax treatment. So if you buy that asset, when you go to sell it, you're going to have a tax implication. By the way, you're going to have a tax implication whether you buy it in an ETF wrapper or you buy it and then sell it as just the Bitcoin itself. There's going to be a tax implication in the United States. But if you're trying to think about, I want to be an investor who does not need to square up with the IRS every year, then you might want to look at holding Bitcoin uh, as an ETF in your IRA, in your 401k. I think that would be available both in traditional
Mm-hmm.
and Roth styles. And so you will want to look at whether that is attractive to you in evaluating your larger asset allocation, for the purpose of not having to reconcile that with the IRS and your state Department of Revenue every year. So it just makes it a different avenue. Some people are never going to go down the holding cryptocurrencies directly, and they want it to neatly fit into a platform where they can see it with all of their other investments.
I think those are excellent points, and really starts to set the stage for the fact that you have options. I think with at the end of the day, yes, we're talking about cryptocurrencies and we're talking about investments and all sorts of other things, but underneath it all, or perhaps the end game, at least for me, and I offer it for listeners as well, is this idea of freedom. Freedom comes with options. Freedom comes with information. Um, fear is not an investment strategy. Either the fear of getting in, which I'm now calling fogey because I don't know how to properly pronounce FOGI, so it's fogey, and FOMO, with which we're all familiar, fear of missing out. Both uh, I love the word, contained in a wrapper of fear. That is not an investment strategy. The fear of missing out versus the fear of getting in. And so pushing past that, we fear what we don't understand, quite frankly. And so the idea of even talking through this, in fact, let's go through some kind of bullet points or takeaways from just understanding ETFs at the basic level. Jo, you've done an extraordinary job to just, a lot of times people need by analogy or things with which they're already familiar. And then just a final point about kind of the lead up to the launch of the ETF, and then we'll get out of here. But so we have an ETF is a type of investment fund traded on a stock exchange, much in the same way as stocks, and you mentioned mutual funds as well. Tracks an index or a commodity. Could track bonds, a basket of assets, right? So, and I'm so glad that you distinguished between mutual funds as a matter of pricing and ETFs. But unlike mutual funds, an ETF trades throughout the day. And so that the prices may be more or less than the net asset value. And that's a critically important point rather than something that remains stable throughout the day. Maybe the one drawback is that, the lights go off on the trading desk and exchanges, but Bitcoin continues to chug along. And people have experienced that with the kind of the frothiness of the market, the kind of the pullback, which scares people when you think, that robust 45, 46, 47, and then the pullback. I call that a dip and an opportunity, but that is not legal or financial advice. But also, volatility isn't bad. And when I started to look and compare the beginnings of other exchange traded funds, they were not stable initially. It finds its way. You have inflows and outflows and adjustments. You have this completely other character that is grayscale that has to convert from a trust. Like there's a lot going on, but that doesn't undermine the fact that SEC approved investment vehicle that gives you exposure to Bitcoin when you don't hold it yourself, or it could be a both and, is fantastic for the United States. And we start to catch up to your original point with kind of ROW, the rest of world, right? And so if we continue to think about it in that way, now you will know the language and the questions to even ask an advisor, or ways that if you don't have an advisor, and you don't necessarily have to, because now we have all sorts of platforms. I won't name them, but you can go on and there's a bunch of information. So if you're at an ARC or Fidelity, BlackRock, Grayscale, etc., there will be no shortage of information to get people up to speed on how to participate. Here's a little funny part before we get out of here. I don't think it was so funny to the SEC, bless their hearts. But you know how you and we always talk about being safer, about, making sure that you have two-factor authentication, maybe you have a VPN, that you have to be careful out there in those internet streets. So we had this little thing of the Twitter account of the SEC being compromised. Evidently, we're not calling it a hack, because they were SIM swapped and something and a partridge in a pear tree. And so an announcement that we all anticipated came out on a day that it wasn't supposed to, because someone got a hold or SIM swapped that device and actually started tweeting out some things. Your thoughts on that, counselor?
Oh boy. I feel the spirit of my grandmother telling me to hush right now. But
He like, uh-oh, is this thing on? Is this thing on?
I think the most prudent response to that would be to reinforce what you do all the time, what we do all the time, is just to
Mm-hmm.
understand that, first of all, for your own personal safety, you need to understand, check, and double check that you
Yes.
have appropriate security measures in place. And then also to be careful with information in this space that is coming from an authentic source, and maybe pause for a moment and double check from another
Mm-hmm.
trusted source. So one of the things that when people ask me questions about this space that I also say is, I will share with you trusted resources, right? You should not take my word alone for anything. Anything that I share with you should be backed up with other trusted resources. And certainly when information is being communicated through social media, that is all the more the case. I think people had good reason to have some pause and expect that they could trust the account, the social media account of the Securities and Exchange Commission. But I think it's worth a double check. And I would also say, as you're thinking through this, and maybe if you have some pause seeing what's happened quite recently in the markets, step back and take a longer term view. If you're going to be an investor,
Mm.
it's important to know that markets, not just commodities markets, not just markets related to emerging technology, markets at large are going to have ebbs and flows. Any investor should be aware of the reasons why they're making an investment of their hard earned money. And so when you look at blockchain and the myriad of digital assets that are blockchain based, and more specifically Bitcoin, I would ask you to take a step back and look and see where there have been some consistencies over a longer view that might create an opportunity when markets step back for a moment. And then see for yourself, make that longer term judgment. I have found that many financial advisors are suggesting a 1 to 5% allocation. So,
Mm-hmm.
not a bet your home or your future well being, but an opportunity to see, is this something that makes sense within my portfolio? And is there a way for me, not only just from a portfolio perspective, but from a professional perspective, to leverage my talents?
Absolutely. Diversification within an asset class and across your asset portfolio. And that requires your time and your attention. And so the whole head in the sand, even about investments, and I certainly used to do it. I have learned more about money, my own risk tolerance, my investment thesis, what an investment thesis is. I didn't learn that for all of my highfalutin education, although I love you, Northwestern. Thank you very much. And you too, Howard Law. And my parents. You're amazing. I've learned more in the last 7 years than I have in my entire life. And that also is a sense of freedom and empowerment when, I think of at every job, at the end, and they're just handing you something about your benefits package. And people are like, I don't even know, just pick for me. Let's even pause there and be more reflective, because the only way that we're going to have options is that we really lean in, educate ourselves, and then of course, Joe and I are experts and professionals in a particular area. We do not want you to be your own lawyer, but that doesn't mean you wouldn't learn the questions and the things that you want so that we would serve you, not the other way around. And so keep that in mind when you are thinking about finances as well. And in all seriousness, about two-factor authentication, VPNs, if you don't know any of these terms, definitely look them up. And the check your sources, the quality of your source, and the quantity of sources, as Joe has said. We do this all the time as lawyers and academics in my case as well. And we offer that to you. You can do this, I promise you. And it starts with the first step of, obviously, thank you for listening to this episode. We will drop some resources and some links so that you will have a variety and diversity of resources and sources to begin your journey or to continue your journey, either as an investor or a professional, particularly those professionals where investors, governments, businesses will be turning to you and relying on you for advice. So now we think of ethical obligations. I just talked about this with my class, that part of competence to practice law, for example, requires technological competence, not just to turn on Zoom and make sure that you're not on mute, but also what are the technological and innovative advancements that are impacting your clients, your business, and your future. And so we hope that this episode serves you well in that capacity, to be sure. And Joe, I leave you with final comments of any takeaways or information that you want to leave with folks, including how to get more information about you and your work.
Well, thank you for that. My final takeaway would be reiterating you belong here. Whatever your
Mm.
talents are, this is a global technology that will impact us all, and we need a broad diversity of inclusive voices speaking up and joining into this conversation. So I applaud anyone who makes that effort to join in and understand better through great resources like Tech Intersect and Digital Money Demystified and others. In terms of reaching out to me, I am JoAnn, JoAnn Holmes, HOLMES on LinkedIn. My website is holmesatlaw.com. And I am that geek. I am that nerd who really loves blockchain technology, loves monetizing IP, and working with business professionals in this space to advance it and show its value. So again, thank you for the opportunity to be with you and serve your audience, Tonya. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.